Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Our next team had a very disappointing end to their season, including an upset loss in their bowl game, but are looking to bounce back and look poised for another SEC championship run. They are the Auburn Tigers. Auburn nearly became the first two-loss team to make the college football playoff last season. They lost to Clemson early on in the season 14-6, were upset by LSU in Death Valley, but also upset number 1 Georgia and Alabama at Jordan-Hare Stadium, made the SEC championship where they lost to Georgia 28-7, and then were upset by Central Florida and Scott Frost's undefeated team in the Peach Bowl at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. And that's where things kick off once again for the Tigers for the 2018 season with a big game against the Washington Huskies back in Atlanta. So that would be 3 straight games for the Tigers at this exact stadium. And a lot of people are calling this game against Washington a play-in game for the playoff. The winner of this game is going to really boost their resume for the playoff committee, and the loser is really going to have to run the table in their conference if they want to have any shot at getting to the college football playoff. And so this game is really intriguing. You have 2 great quarterbacks, Jarrett Stidham of Auburn and Jake Browning at Washington. You've got Myles Gaskin at Washington going up what would be a weaker Auburn running back core. They lost Cameron Petway. They lost Kerryon Johnson. They do bring in Cam Martin, who can be very explosive, absolutely. They lost their 2 lead running backs last season, so that's bound to hurt them. And Auburn also losing 2 of their key wide receivers. Sure, they have Darius Slayton coming back at wide receiver, but Eli Stove and Will Hastings both getting injured in the spring. Not expected to return until at least mid-season or maybe even not at all. So that's obviously a little bit of a concern for Jarrett Stidham and his wide receiving core there. But Auburn, of course, their strength is going to be their defense, a very solid and deep defensive line that's going to really bully a lot of these SEC offensive lines around and could give Washington's offensive line a bit of a fit. However, Washington returns 17 starters, 8 on offense, 9 on defense. And I really picture this Washington defense to be a lot like their defense from 2 years ago when they made the college football playoff and lost to Alabama. This is a very solid Washington team. It's also going to be a very fun match to watch between 2 great offensive minds in Gus Malzahn and Chris Peterson. So this is going to be very fun to watch. In the end, though, I'm predicting a loss here for Auburn. And the only reason I'm going to do that is because I think Washington's defense is going to be able to get some stops on Jarrett Stidham. I also think that in the end, offensively talented, I'm going to give the edge to Washington. They have a very solid quarterback with Browning and a very solid running back with Gaskins, returning 8 starters on that side of the ball. Yes, Auburn returned 6 on that side of the ball, and Jarrett Stidham is very talented, but I'm going to give the edge to the Huskies here to grab another win here in Atlanta and send Auburn to 0-3 at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They return home on September 8th to play Alabama State, obviously a win there. And then they play their first SEC game on September 15th against LSU, a bit of a revenge game for Auburn. As you remember, they blew a pretty big lead to the Tigers last year in Baton Rouge. LSU came all the way back and upset Auburn, and many thought that was the end of Auburn's playoff hopes. But of course, we knew that wasn't the case of beating Georgia and Alabama. But this time, with it coming back to Auburn and LSU having a very weak team this season, only 10 returning starters, 5 on offense, 5 on defense. They do bring in Joe Burrow at quarterback, but I do not see him making that big of a difference. LSU's defense is going to be the strength of this team, but I don't know if they're going to have enough to stop Jarrett Stidham. They're going to be 3 games in here. Obviously, 1 big game in with Washington there, so any chemistry he needs to get with his wide receivers, all the new running backs that need to get broken in, they're going to be able to get that. I think they get the win here over LSU, the first win in conference play. Then Arkansas comes to town the week after that, another home game for the Tigers here. Last time Arkansas came to Jordan-Hare Stadium, Auburn won 56-3. And that could be another beatdown like that this year for the Razorbacks as they bring in Chad Morris, a new head coach, or breaking in a new quarterback. No one knows who really their starter is going to be right now, whether it's Cole Kelly or Ty Story, but neither have looked super impressive. A new defensive scheme. There's a lot of missing pieces for this Arkansas team to have, really, in my opinion, any chance to come in to Jordan-Hare and get a win over the Tigers. So that's another win for Auburn there. And then another win here over Southern Miss. Shouldn't be any issues for them there. And then you have a really big game here against Mississippi State on the road. And as I mentioned in my Alabama video, Mississippi State is going to be a very dangerous team this year. 17 returning starters, a new head coach in Joe Moorhead, but he knows how to coach an offense, and that is going to be their strength this year. They have 9 returning starters on that side of the ball. You have Nick Fitzgerald coming in at quarterback, a dual threat quarterback. So once again, a very, very fun game here with 2 great quarterbacks in Stidham and Fitzgerald, and obviously a solid defensive line. I could see this game, despite the 2 teams having solid quarterbacks and solid offenses, being a fairly low-scoring game because Mississippi State's defense is not getting a lot of attention right now. Auburn's is. We know Auburn's defense is going to be very strong this year with 7 returning starters on that side of the ball. But Mississippi State's team isn't getting a lot of attention on that side of the ball either. So I could see this game in Starkville being very, very defensive-sided, very low-scoring, maybe in the low 20s, maybe, mid-20, 30s right there, but not very high-scoring at all. And I was very, very tempted to give Auburn a loss here, but I think in the end, experience on the coaching side of the ball with Gus Malzahn is going to give Auburn the edge here. Keep in mind, this game could also determine who finishes second in the SEC West behind Alabama, assuming Auburn does not challenge Alabama for that #1 spot. But I'm going to give Auburn the win here on the road against Mississippi State. But that was one game that I really, really struggled with and thought long and hard about. But I'm going to give the Tigers the win over there solely based on experience. And then they get Tennessee here on October 13th. Tennessee, another team that's breaking in a new head coach, and Jeremy Pruitt. Tennessee just had a train wreck offseason with all of their trying to find a new coach. They bring in a solid quarterback in Keller Chris. Being at home, though, very loud environment. Jordan Hare is one of the tougher places to play in the SEC by far. Shouldn't be any issue for the Tigers here. Another win over the Volunteers. And then at Ole Miss, this is another team that I've mentioned that I think could pull off some upsets this year. A couple upsets over some teams they shouldn't beat. Ole Miss, despite not being able to go to a bowl this year due to their bowl ban, will be very talented, led by Jordan Teamu and a solid wide receiving core. Problem is their defense. And with a high-octane offense that Auburn has with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback and perhaps having Eli Stover and Will Hastings back around this time of year, I do not see Ole Miss getting a win despite it being at home. So that is a win for Auburn. And then their bye week coming in to Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher coming in. Another great head coaching matchup with Malzahn and Jimbo Fisher. But as I said, Texas A&M does not have a lot of high expectations this year. It's going to take some time for Jimbo Fisher to get his style of play in with the Aggies and to get his team up to high standards like he did at Florida State. This game's at Auburn. Auburn went into Texas A&M last year and took care of business. I expect them to do the same this year. Another win for Auburn, and they are looking very solid at 8-1 going to that final stretch of the season. But here is the problem with this final stretch of the season. By far the toughest, Georgia and Alabama both on the road. That's killer. So you've got Georgia, who is obviously going to be looking out to get revenge. They got their revenge in the SEC Championship when it mattered most last year, annihilating Auburn 28-7. This year, with it being at Georgia, remember last year Auburn annihilated Georgia at Jordan Hare Stadium last year. This year it's at Georgia, and a lot of people are saying Georgia might not be as good this year. They lose a lot of starters on the defensive side of the ball. They lose their core running backs with Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. However, with this being on the road for Auburn, it's going to be a very, very difficult environment to play in. I still have a lot of faith in Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift. A lot of people are calling him overrated and might not be able to fill the shoes of Michel and Chubb. I think he's going to do a great job. Georgia, their offense actually might be their strength this year, more so than their defense. But Kirby Smart, as we all know, more of a defensive-minded coach. This game is going to be close for about the first half. I think Georgia pulls away late. With it being on the road, I'm going to give Auburn a loss here, which will be their second loss. Auburn, by far, will be a top 10 team at this point in the season going to that Georgia game if this all turns out to be true. So if it's a close game, they might not drop too far, which will set up a big game against Alabama. They'll defeat Liberty here right before Alabama, a little tune-up game. Keep in mind, though, Liberty, this is their first year in the FBS, so that's something to keep your eye on. And then Alabama in the Iron Bowl on the road. Obviously, another very, very loud environment. Auburn getting the big upset win last year, really just annihilating the Crimson Tide, duly thanks to their defense. Of course, Jarrett Stidham played very, very well in that game, but their defense is what really was the difference maker in last year's Iron Bowl. This year, it's at Bryant-Denny Stadium. I don't know how much Auburn's going to be wanting this game. Of course, every year they want the Iron Bowl. Despite either team's record, they want to win the Iron Bowl. But they just lost 2 weeks ago to Georgia. How motivated they're going to be knowing that they might be out of the SEC West race. Also, Alabama, I have them undefeated going into this game. They know they're 1 win away. And, of course, it's a revenge game. Nick Saban, you know, is going to have his team fired up for this game, by far. He's going to have his team fired up because they got defeated last year and almost got put out of the college football playoff due to this Iron Bowl loss to Auburn. It's a rivalry game. It's on the road. I think Alabama's defense rattles Stidham. he has never played at Bryant-Denny Stadium. We're going to give Auburn another loss here, which will put the Tigers with a 9-3 record, which I know some people will not be happy with. But when you look at the schedule, it is by far not very easy. They get some very key games at home, and their road games aren't too bad except for Georgia and Alabama. But think about it. You got Georgia, you got Alabama, you got Washington. All potential top 10 teams to start the season. And we know that Georgia and Alabama, respectively, should be their respective conference division winners. So it's a very, very tough schedule for Auburn. Another road game here at Mississippi State. So 9-3 should be fairly generous. Maybe they can pull off an upset on the road against Georgia and Alabama, or maybe they can get that one win over Washington, which will go a long way in helping them get into the college football playoff if they can pull off an upset. But the schedule right now is not lining up. You have a very difficult schedule, very tough teams here with Washington, Georgia, and Alabama. All three of those not coming at home for the Tigers. That is something to really keep in mind. But 9-3 for the Auburn Tigers should be good enough to get them second in the West, and obviously a very, very solid bowl game. If you haven't already, go check us out on Twitter at Gridiron Expert, not the Gridiron Expert, just Gridiron Expert. We have a new Twitter account. Go check us out there. And as always, please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Gridiron Expert.